Hi and welcome to Daily TFT. Today I wanted to talk about Ornn items. Now the question always has come up in my stream about can you make a ranking of Ornn items, which is the Ornn item you should take, which is the one that you should avoid. And you know what, I figured I'll make a list. Now I'm not gonna make this whole tier list thing with S, A, B, etc. because quite frankly I think context matters. One of the best items could, depending on the context, be one of the worst. So I think it's really important that you take context into consideration when judging these Ornn items. We have a bunch of Ornn items to go over. I'll just take them from left to right and talk a little bit about what I like about that Ornn item, when I would take it, and who I would put it on. Let's start off with Anima Visage. Now, Anima Visage, it has one very clear user, and that's Cho'Gath. I think if you end up with an Anima Cho'Gath Visage opener, here the mutation honestly doesn't even matter that much. Having this opener alone is completely busted. It's pretty much a guaranteed top 4, so if I end up combining a Cho'Gath with an Anima Visage as my opener in stage 1, that's awesome. Overall though, I think Anima Visage is a pretty great item. It has a lot of great uses. It can be really good on champions like Morgana, for example. It can be really good on champions like Vex. Even normal tanks like Braum can make pretty good use out of it. Or Vi. I think Vi is a very popular one because she has a shield and she's a bruiser, so there is a lot of HP going on there. I would say these tend to be the most common. Obviously Leona as well. I mean, some of the bodyguards we have to take into consideration as well. It's pretty much just the item goes on your main tank. Super solid item. I think Anima Visage is an item you can take throughout every stage of the game. Though I would say as an opener, it's probably stronger. I mean, the region part is really strong even in stage 4. But it's not going to win you fights as hard in stage 4 as it would before that, simply because people by this point will be running around with a lot of damage and a lot of anti-heal, but overall still definitely a top tier item. Next one we have Def's Defiance. Def's Defiance is a hard one. So the way this item works is that if you take 100 damage, then 70% of that, so 70 damage, is instead, it becomes this damage over time over the next 5 seconds. And that damage over time actually can kill you. So it would deal a maximum of 69 damage or something like this if it would leave you at 1 HP. And it also, you receive Omnivamp, 20% Omnivamp, I believe. It's a pretty solid item. You see it from time to time. It's pretty much, I mean, you can see it on almost every unit. It's the Omnivamp part. I think I would suggest one thing, which is that Def's Defiance honestly is more of a backline carry type item. Simply because the Omnivamp is only relevant if that champion actually ends up dealing damage. So, for example, an Aurelia, or maybe it's a Gnar carry, something like this, right? It's somebody who deals a lot of damage and can probably make use out of the Omnivamp. And I think the mistake people make with something like Def's Defiance, which I made myself too, for example, in the previous set with Prot Reroll, I thought, you know, it's like, oh, I have a Kassadin 3-star with Protector, Def's Defiance on him, it's gonna be amazing, right? Because all that damage is gonna be damage over time, and he's gonna block it, and it was completely useless. This item is a bit of a bait. I think it's a great item, but I think it's not a tank item. And this is where a lot of the bad impressions from these items come from. Is like, people put it on a Braum, for example, and it's just completely useless. If you put it on main tanks, see, the thing about Anima Visage is you can put it on the main tank. Def's Defiance is totally a carry type item. It's a backline type item. You need to put this on your damage dealer, on your Sivir, on your Aurelia, on your Kha'Zix, something like this, right? Make them tanky, give them sustain, and that's what the item is for. I think it's a good item. I think it's solid. Personally, though, I don't like taking this item as much. I always struggle getting a good use out of it. So Just as a personal preference, I don't like taking this item too much, but I've seen a lot of people who prefer taking this item and also finding success with it. Third one, we have Eternal Winter. Eternal Winter used to be pretty solid when you were running isolated. Eternal Winter was something like in set 6, you put Eternal Winter on an isolated Scion, and it was amazing. That was so good. Now it's less so. You don't, in the set right now, you don't really run something like an isolated Alistair because it's super easy to outplay him. I mean, all you have to do is just put specific units, you know, get him to walk to the, put up your block here, get the Alistair to ult towards the wrong side. It's pretty sad. You don't really get that much use out of it. I think Eternal Winter is something I tend to avoid. I don't think the effect is that strong. It's usually combined with isolated frontliners, which is something that isn't happening too often. Obviously, if you had something like a Morgana 3-star isolated in the front, it's not bad. But for me, Eternal Winter right now, it feels very overnerfed. Back when they... Eternal Winter used to be the problem child of the Ornn items. It was so good back in set 4. They just ended up nerfing it. And what we have left over is, I feel, a shadow of what it used to be. And I usually don't feel like this item helps me win any fights, which is why I tend to avoid it. But like I said, it had its uses, especially in set 6 with the isolated Scion. For Trinity Force, not Infinity Force, sorry. I always have to remember. I always have to remind myself that this item is called Infinity Force. Infinity Force, just super solid overall. It's your all-rounder type item. It gives a crazy amount of stats. It's something you can put on pretty much every carry. Obviously, the attack speed and critical strike type carries tend to be favored. It gives a decent amount of crit as well. It's not surprising to see it on someone like Sivir or Aurelia or Jhin. Doesn't really matter, honestly. It's just overall super solid. It's an all-rounder type items. It won't crazily win you any fights, but it always feels like you got yourself a strong item that helps you get through the game. I'd recommend taking it in most cases. It's sort of like, it's a safe bet. It's really hard to put yourself into a corner with Infinity Force. It's almost always the safe choice, the good choice, if you feel like the other options are lacking. Manazane, I don't know. Okay, so here, there's a joke with me going on calling this item Manazane, which is pronounced wrong, but it's a play on words in German, so you don't have to worry about it. So if I end up pronouncing this item horribly wrong, just please bear with me. Manazane is a great item. It's one of my favorites, I would say, and it has a bunch of great uses. So for early game, I think what you should you're looking for these two champions if you have this item. Caitlyn and Malzahar are by far the best users of this item in the early game. Stage 2 and Stage 3 for the most part. The reason why it's great on so this item gives you, I think, wait, is that description even right? I could have sworn it's 100 mana by now, but whatever. Doesn't matter anyways. The way it works is this, that Malzahar tends to do, so he casts his ultimate. I mean, the item gives a decent amount of start mana. He casts his ultimate, and then he gets so much mana from this item that he immediately casts again, and as a third one. And I think that one is pretty sick. Starting off your fight with 3 Malzahar ultimates is amazing. It's super easy to win fights because of it. It's super easy to win streak because of it. And with Caitlyn, it's Caitlyn is just awesome because you immediately get a second ultimate after her first one, which in return she will one-shot 2 units. And that's a pretty good way of winning your early game if you have a proper front line to buy you enough time. As for later uses gets a bit more difficult. I mean, I've seen this item on Lucian carry. Sometimes it's on the mediocre side. It can be useful, but it has it has a little bit of the blue buff argument going on. I've also seen this on Misfortune from time to time. I think Ahri is alright, having Manazane instead of something like blue buff. I think the way Manazane worked on Ahri is that her second and third ultimate comes super fast, so she immediately stacks a bunch of orbs. But you know, then the effect is kind of gone and you don't have mana items anymore. I think it's good. I think it's good on Ahri. It's but there's better users out of there. So I'm just trying to find them right now. So I think for me the favorites are Renata and Orianna. And probably we're gonna have to talk about Victor as well. So those three, Victor, Orianna, Renata, I think they are the ones that tend to get this item in the late game. The thing about Renata is just that she doesn't have that large of a mana pool with 60 mana. And Renata ultimates stacks, so it's not like you ever lose any type of value. And I think her stacking ultimate at the beginning of the fight a lot of the times really helps you to win fights, so I think that item was pretty solid on her. Orianna is just the ultimate utility choice. Orianna is a staple in a lot of comps. There's so many enchanter type setups that you have running around right now that Orianna is just always a super solid choice to put in your board for a bunch of CC. And having her the first ultimate come earlier and having a follow-up second ult fairly fast, that's just pretty brutal. It wins you a lot of the fights, and it's probably one of my favorite choices as a late game holder. We also have Victor. Now, Victor comes up pretty hard to play right now. You need to be pretty kept towards the end. You probably need to have a Silco together with the Victor as well. And there's also the argument to be made that if do you really need the second Victor ultimate? And it's kind of because Victor is all about kind of like winning the fight on the first ultimate. But yeah, it's a decent choice. It's not terrible. I think something to consider with Manazane as well is that a question that comes up a lot is that how does the mana lock work? And from what I've tested, so I did some testing on, for example, a champion like Vex, because Vex her ultimate has a mana lock of 4 seconds. And Manazane gives mana for 4 seconds. So my theory was that, well, if Manazane doesn't give mana in a mana lock, then the moment the Vex ultimate would be over, she wouldn't be receiving any mana, right? And that would kind of prove that Manazane and mana lock have a negative synergy, but they don't. You still get the mana at the end. So the Manazane kind of like it ticks in the background. It remembers that it's supposed to give you mana during the mana lock, which can sometimes look pretty weird. So that means, for example, if the Vex ultimate is over, then her mana bar won't immediately fill up. It's not like she gets like, bam, she's full mana immediately because all of the mana gets transferred at once. But there's a lot of very large ticks that are happening right after the mana lock, and she pretty much goes full mana right away. So as a proof, Manazane and the mana lock does work together, but it's a bit wonky. But you should never be afraid though at giving Manazane to a champion that has a mana lock. You won't lose that type of mana, as far as I know, at least from what I've tested. If you have a different example, show me. I would love to see it. I haven't fully figured out this item anyways. Okay, what else we have? We have the Black Cleaver. Oh, so the Obsidian Cleaver. Obsidian Cleaver is super interesting. This is an item Riot had to nerf. It's so weird, but it used to be the most unpopular choice. Why would I want to have Obsidian Cleaver? I can just build Last Whisper. This item is useless. I don't want to take it. But the thing is, in high elo, especially in Challenger, This was the most picked Ornn item, I believe. And it was the most successful one as well, so much that Riot had to nerf this item. But why is that? Why is Obsidian Cleaver so strong? I think that something people need to understand about the Cleaver is that all attacks and spell damage shreds the resistances. And Last Whisper is tied behind requiring Last Whisper. That means that if you give Obsidian Cleaver to a Sivir with no items, then every single ricochet, doesn't matter if it crits or if it doesn't, it will apply the shred. And that is extremely strong. That is extremely useful. It's also extremely strong in the early game. Obsidian Cleaver overall, it's very underrated. It's definitely a solid choice. It's probably one that you avoided until now, but you should probably give this item a chance. Especially combining it on champions that have sort of like an ability to AoE apply it. Sivir being the prime candidate. I think you'll be pleasantly surprised giving it to your main carry in the early game, and potentially win streaking, because the amount of damage increase you get is quite considerable. But unfortunately, I can't really say too much about the Cleaver because, truth to be told, it's an item that I also never ended up taking that much myself. Let's talk about Randuins. Well, I don't actually want to talk about Randuins, but I guess we can talk about it. Randuins is weird, so it's a 50 armor MR buff for the people in a circle around the champion. It's okay. I think it's probably a lot better in the early game because it's flat stats. So people don't have the capability of shredding the tankiness. So using this in the early game to gain tankiness and therefore win streaking from it. But Randuins has this issue of people tend to completely try to maximize this item. And as a consequence, what's going to end up happening is that, I mean, this is obviously not a team comp, but what ends up happening is that they're very susceptible to a Shroud hitting their entire team. They're very susceptible to an Alistar, or, I mean, there is a lot of abilities. A Renata, for example. A Renata would love if the opponents are clumping up like this. And I think my advice for Randuins is, obviously you can take it, it's a fine item, but don't try to maximize this item in late game. I think this is the #1 mistake people do with this item. It's similar to the keeper problem that people used to have in stage 4, in set 4. People try to maximize the keeper shield at every cost. So they try to maximize clumping up, and I want every little bit of shield, but as a consequence, they completely screw over their positioning. And in late game, positioning is more important than 50 armor and 50 MR. In late game, positioning is more important than trying to maximize your shield by 100 or 200 or whatever. So my one advice for you is that in late game, try not to care too much about Randuins. Don't clump up. Don't try to maximize. Prioritize positioning, then prioritize Randuins. Other than that, I think probably an honorable mention is Assassins. I think Randuins is pretty solid with Assassins. So just as a small example, but let's just say we have some sort of a Leona with a Randuins. And you have maybe a Talon comp that's running 4 Assassins, so I don't know, could be something like this. See, the thing is, this whole clumping issue isn't that big of a deal if you're running Assassins, and Assassins becoming more tanky can be pretty useful, so it's a surprisingly decent item for Assassin type comps, because what we learned from set 5, especially 5.0, is that Shadow Locket and Assassins was a pretty nasty combo. Making Assassins more tanky is extremely hard to deal with, so this is definitely one of the uses that you can keep in mind if you're faced with the choice. 3 more items to go. Now we get to my personal favorite, which is the Rocket-Propelled Fist. I made videos about the Rocket-Propelled Fist already, about funny interactions. For example, that if you put a Rocket-Propelled Fist onto Blitzcrank, it won't hook the same target as the Blitzcrank, it will hook somebody else, meaning if you, it can act almost like a Zephyr. So if you have a Rocket-Propelled Fist on a Blitzcrank, you put it in the left corner, then you're gonna end up, so if this is the example here, if you have the Rocket-Propelled Fist onto the Blitzcrank, then it will hook the Singed and the Poppy, and it's not like both hooks are gonna go on the Singed. This is pretty useful to do. Rocket-Propelled Fist, so the effect is decent, obviously. Having a Blitzcrank hook is pretty annoying and people oftentimes don't expect it. But the real value in this item, and this is, I think, what a lot of people are missing, is the stats. Rocket-Propelled Fist gives, I think it's 30 mana and 750 HP. It's almost like a Vamox. A Vamox gives 1000 HP. This item gives 750 HP, and that's just straight up brutal. They're having Rocket-Propelled Fist on Morgana now means she gets 30 mana, so she's gonna ult faster. She gets 750 HP. It's close to a Vamox, and you're gonna hook somebody into the Morgana ult. So that's a win-win-win. Rocket-Propelled Fist on someone like Morgana is just brutal. It's one of my favorite combinations in this game. You can even be really annoying with this and combine this with a Blitzcrank. So you have, like, for example, you have a Blitzcrank behind a Morgana, and the Morgana has a Rocket-Propelled Fist, and now all of the frontliners plus two of the backliners are all going to end up in the Morgana ultimate. The amount of value you get is crazy. I personally love Rocket-Propelled Fist. I think it's one of the best choices a lot of times because it's also similar to the Infinity Force. It's a super safe choice. It's so hard to not get use out of this item simply because of the base stats and the effect. You're always gonna end up running some sort of frontliner that you can put this item on, and you can put this on any frontliner. It doesn't matter if it's a Braum, a Morgana, a Leona, a Vex. It doesn't matter. You're gonna get use out of it. So I think this item is great. I think this item is very underrated, and I heavily recommend that you try it out, and especially try putting it on Morgana. You'll be pleasantly surprised about how easy some of those fights are gonna become. 2 more items to go. Next up is the Gold Collector. Gold Collector is quite the interesting one because I think here is part of where the context comes in. Having Gold Collector in the early game is about 10 times better than having it in the late game. Gold Collector, you have to think, so for example, let's say I'm gonna make a tier list and I'm gonna put Gold Collector on S tier. And people see this tier list without the context and they're in stage 4 and they're like, oh yeah, there's this Gold Collector, this S tier item, I'm totally going to take this, right? But it's completely useless in stage 4 because why would you want Gold Collector in stage 4 instead of a proper combat item? And this is part of the ongoing discussion regarding economy augments against combat augments, and it's more or less the same discussion here. The earlier you get Gold Collector, meaning stage 1, it's awesome, it's fantastic. It's like having an economy augment that scales pretty well, that can give you a crazy amount of value. But having something like Three's the Company in stage 4 is extremely terrible, and it's the same for Gold Collector. Even though the item gives some stats and it has a decent effect, in stage 4 this item is close to useless and should honestly be avoided. One thing I want you to remember about the Gold Collector is that it gives 30% crit, I believe, and that makes it a pretty solid choice together with Last Whisper, together with Infinity Edge, and together with Jeweled Gauntlet. A discussion that also sometimes comes up is regarding Mazahar, for example, and Void Mutants, because the Void Mutants, they have an execute effect, and they're wondering how does this work, and the answer is that the higher I think Gold Collector has the honestly I should probably know this, but I think Gold Collector has the proc at 10%, no? Yes, okay, good. I think the Void Mutants have it at 20% and the Gold Collector 10%. So the Void Mutant would proc before the Gold Collector, but the Gold Collector still benefits from the execute of the Void Mutants. So you get the execute at 20% and still have your chance at getting the gold. And that makes Gold Collector an extremely strong choice together with the Void Mutants, and especially on Malzahar. Malzahar on Void Mutants is very likely your best user for this item, but there's also obviously choices like Game Clank Lucian in a twin shot type setup, especially because of the 30% crit. For example, the Lucian item build might look something like this. Having it in a twin shot socialite setup, that's also super strong, gives you a lot of gold, allows you to get your economy up to a pretty insane level. I think Gold Collector is great. I think it's a very solid first choice. In stage 3, I kind of would have to think about it, and in stage 4, I believe it's an absolute no-go, and you should never go for it in stage 4. And for the final one, we have Zhonya's. Zhonya's is a pretty interesting one. The effect is that the wearer becomes invulnerable for 3 seconds after they're below 40% HP. And it also works as a aggro drop, I believe. So the moment the Zhonya applies, everybody drops the aggro. That your champion is considered not on the board for the 3 seconds, but they can still act, obviously, during those 3 seconds. Can be pretty solid. I think I've seen somebody run this in Ahri, and I thought it was extremely solid. On Ahri. It gives a decent amount of tank stats, I think. I don't have all of the tank stats straight out of my head, but as far as I remember, Riot ended up buffing Zhonya's in a very recent patch, and I think that buff really ended up elevating this item from being kind of a low-tier choice to being something you should definitely take into consideration if you're playing AP setups. I mean, the obvious choices for this item is someone like Ahri or Morgana, not Morgana, sorry, Victor. Ahri and Victor, they're sort of the obvious choices. It protects them against Assassin. They like to ramp up. They benefit from the aggro drop. I think someone like Renata can probably make a decent use out of this too, because being invulnerable for 3 seconds means opponents take the Renata damage for 3 seconds. That's pretty solid as well. What other choices do we have? I mean, it's overall, I would just say it's a pretty solid defensive choice for AP type champions, but you do have to take into consideration that it involves an aggro drop, so putting it on your frontliner can cause this item to pop very fast, and then everybody's just going to ignore your frontliner, run past him and into your backline. So similar to the argument with Defiance, I think Zhonya's is more of a backline type items, especially focused towards AP carries, and it's not too much something I would put on the front line. Now, it doesn't mean you can't put it on Morgana and Vex. I think you can. I think it's fine on both of them, but the aggro reset is something you should take into consideration if you're playing isolated Morgana or isolated Vex in your front line. Now, obviously, I didn't get over every single situation and whatnot. I think, but I hope that this video helped you gain an understanding of which items can potentially be strong, which can be useless, and which one you can take depending on what stage you're in. If you have any of your favorite examples that I ended up missing out, like you totally should have mentioned that this item on this champion is completely broken, then please feel free to let me know in the comments. Other than that, that was it for me today. See you guys tomorrow.